They order everybody to lie down and all that. On the other side, another 10 of these men, and they come, they begin to rape them, and they order the rest to watch as the others are raped. One woman was raped was raped by 10 men, not 10 times, by 10 different men, the other one by 8, the other one by 6, the other one by 4, 3, and all the one 19-year-old was lucky, if it is lucky, that was raped by one man, but every one of them. And then they strip them off, they strip the men, they take everything around them. I'm told one man, they even took the underpants and they completely left it.
24 rapes a day, 18 murders a day, 21 house robberies a day, 30 hijackings a day, and almost one kidnap for ransom every day, and 508 citizens of Gauteng being affected directly by crime every single day. I'm Fred Nell, and you're watching the DA's Town Hall Manifesto series right here on our YouTube and our Facebook channels. And tonight, as you've guessed it, we're talking all things crime in Gauteng. And with me, our guest, Gareth Newham from the Institute of Security Studies, who's the head of the Justice and Violence Prevention Program. Welcome, Gareth.
Thank you.
And then Msimanga, the Gauteng Premier Candidate for the DA, also with me tonight.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Fred.
So, Gareth, crime definitely a problem in our country. Would you agree that with kind of a simplistic cause of crime is because of unemployment and poverty? Is that really the only reason why we have such high crime in South Africa?
No, it's not the only reasons. Those are two very clear push factors that do contribute to the high levels of crime, but it's a complex range of different factors that come to play that determine whether a country has a high level of crime or not, because we do see other countries also with high levels of poverty, unemployment, but don't have the same levels of crime we have. So there are social factors that contribute to crime. Then the other factors, such as alcohol abuse, drug abuse, access to firearms and weapons. Then, of course, the criminal justice system, people's faith in the police. All those factors will play a role in determining the extent to which a country has or a region has a serious crime problem or not.
So, Solly, that also points to a little bit of a problem towards our social fabric as a society in South Africa. Are we morally so decayed that we don't worry about crime anymore?
Well, I think there's quite a number of factors, as Gareth has said. There's quite a number of pushes, and one of them is that I don't think that as a society we have really dealt with the anger issue that we're sitting with. I think there's a lot of anger that is there. That's why you would see such hideous crimes against women and children, against vulnerable people, coming from people who want to exert their power over others. Because that's a social issues that haven't been addressed. That still needs to be addressed in the long run. But I think there's also a big factor that you spoke about. You'd find that where there is high levels of, in South Africa, especially in poor areas, there's high levels of domestic violence that's emanating from men to women who find themselves out of jobs, who cannot work, and the stress levels that I cannot provide for you. Find that there's a lot of femicide, a lot of kids that are being killed, even sometimes by their own mothers. I mean, we have heard stories of mothers who are feeding their children red poison so that the children die, and afterwards then they commit suicide because they cannot provide for them. So I think there's all sorts of other issues that are contributing to towards crime. But I think from a government perspective, we need to then start saying and acting towards eliminating those one by one, and then see whether we are able to then start addressing the general issue of crime. But you can only address those, or you can only get to lessening crime if you really start addressing those, instead of just saying, well, we are living in a violent society and therefore throw up our hands in the air, like what we have seen our minister do a number of times, who said, yeah, well, we're living in a lawless society. And then what? You cannot be in government and say we're living in a lawless society and not act towards addressing that. What are we doing social development wise? What are we doing human settlement wise? Because it also plays a practical role in terms of visible policing in our informal settlements, where police are able to then come in and do visible patrolling. It also plays a role in terms of the kind of infrastructure that you put in place. The fact that you have 143 police stations here, and of those, about 40% don't even have proper, victim empowerment centers. That says a lot. Where in a province you have the highest rate of rape and abuse, you would have thought that every single resource will be made available so that you can deal with that, but that is not the case.
So, Gareth, when I watch channels like Sky News and these kind of things, when there's a murder in the UK or any other place, Germany, you name it, it's headline news. But in South Africa, it's only the real horrendous murders and that catches the headlines. Have we become so numb as a society towards murders? Is it just part of everyday life now? I mean, what's wrong with is there an issue with our psyche here?
Yeah, I think because of the high numbers of murders, they can't all be in the media. As you say, we see the worst ones. And I do think we have become quite numb to it. But I think it's also it's kind of a sense of hopelessness that sometimes feeds into it. It's the sense of trauma. People are scared, and it is a huge problem, and that is our most sort of serious crime. And if you're looking at kind of what characterizes South Africa's crime problem, it is the violence. It is the fact that people can get injured and killed, and that we have so many people being killed. And in high murder precincts, this is a kind of daily thing for the police. They do become rather numb to it because every day there's 2 or 3 more bodies in your area. And then that also speaks to making sure that our detectives, particularly the investigators, are not overwhelmed. They're not carrying too many dockets, especially if they're going after the most serious violent cases. And we are quite concerned that we haven't really seen murder being taken seriously enough. So there's never been a kind of formal statement from the government saying, our murder rates are too high, are we going to do everything possible to bring that murder rate down? Because if you do that, you suddenly realize that you start to analyze what's going on in murders. And murders don't take place randomly everywhere. About 12% of South Africa's police precincts record about half, 50% of all murders. And about 20% are recorded in less than 3% of our police precincts. If you do detailed analysis of where murders are taking place in those high areas, you see as well, it's not on every street. There are usually between 3 and 6 clear hotspot areas. If you then go in to do a detailed analysis of what are the factors linked to those murders, if you look at the dockets, information about the murders, you can start seeing that there are clear patterns. So in the Western Cape, it's much more likely to be because of gang or conflict between groups and organized crime groups. If you're talking about illegal mining, sometimes it's around taxi associations getting into conflict. A lot of it is interpersonal. So a large proportion is young men getting into an argument, usually after drinking alcohol, and that argument getting out of control. An assault happens and the one stabs the other. With the increase in access to firearms, legal firearms, we're seeing that kind of violence has remained relatively stable for the last 10 years. But now we're starting to see over the last decade more organized forms of violence occurring because of organized crime, because of intergroup conflict. And in Gauteng, a big contributing factor to murders is the high level of robberies, everything from street robberies to house robberies and business robberies and carjackings. So you can't have one approach to addressing murder, but you can get enough information to enable you to start figuring out how do we best deal with the murders problem in these particular areas, and you should be able to see a difference over time.
I want to deal with those information systems just a little later on, but just to you, if you're watching at home or work or wherever you are, if you're on our YouTube channel or our Facebook, please remember that you can post a question to our guests here tonight, and in a little while I'll be posting it to them. Solly, you speak about things like victim empowerment centers and these kind of things, but it sounds to me like the strategy in South Africa is to deal with the symptoms rather than the cause of crime. So, as if we're just accepting we're going to have high levels of crime, so therefore we have to look at the victims, we have to look at victim empowerment, we have to look at restitution towards victims. Are we not changing things the wrong way around here?
Well, I think we are more reactive than anything else as a country, and in fact, I dare say that there is no strategy in South Africa to fight crime. There's just no clear strategy, and this is why, from our perspective, one of the things that we do believe that needs to to take place, Fred, is that we need to decentralize authority in terms of fighting crime in South Africa. It cannot be that you'll have, and I think Gareth speaks to this when he says, you can actually zone where these things are. And you can zone, the characters that are coming into play when these things do happen. And therefore, it's important to also understand, in our view, is that you cannot have a police minister that is sitting with the powers in terms of what happens throughout the whole country. I think we need to decentralize and devolve power to the provincial level so that the provinces are able to then not only determine the kind of strategies that each province wants to then pursue, but are also able to be empowered to then recruit, train, and deploy the police. I mean, here in Gauteng, as an example, we're sitting with illegal mining. That is a problem. You go to places like Angelo, you go to Rivoli and the surrounding areas, you go to Mkhale or around Krugersdorp area there. There are people that are fighting on each other, and actually innocent bystanders get to be killed along the way when the Zamazamas are fighting for thefts in those areas. You have an area like Rivoli, where I was literally on Saturday, where an hour before I arrived, someone was killed on the same street that last month two more people, as Gareth has said, were killed. Same street. Is because there's a whole lot of gang-related violence that is taking place around that particular space. You're having, you go to places like DR, where gang violence continue to be the order of the day in a particular space. But again, when you're having instructions, or when you're having authority that is lying there at a provincial, level, your hands become tied up. And therefore, we need to then devolve power there. We need to then say what kind of crimes are happening in the province, and then, what kind of resources do we need? I can tell you right now, the police are saying they will not go into those holes because they're not equipped to go and hunt, the illegal miners underground. A, they say they don't have the right equipment. B, they're not trained adequately to do that, or they're not even don't even have the kind of firepower that these guys that are underground, are having. They're saying, well, you're telling us to go there with pistols. These guys are coming out of there with AK-47s and rifles. What are we going to do there? So that is the problem that you're sitting with. You're having police stations that don't have vehicles. You have police stations that some of them don't even have holding cells. So you are now sitting with infrastructure that is falling apart in terms of dealing with crime. You're having resources that are not there in terms of the firepower that they need. Also, sometimes you're also having skills problems in terms of the dockets, how they set up dockets. It's scary, the amount of policemen that cannot even write a proper statement that can actually stand the test when it's going through prosecution, or it's going in front of a magistrate or a judge. These are some of the things that we now need to then look at and say, in this whole value chain, how do we then drive these things and fix these things so that we can have a better conviction rate, but we can also have prevention that is going to allow us to then give and afford the general society and public a better life.
Gareth, Solly alludes to the police and the quality of police. In terms of the recruitment and training of our police, is that sufficient? Are we equipping them for what lies ahead once they get out of that police college?
Yeah, I think we could be doing a lot more. First of all, what we see with recruitment is what it's been happening before, but it's happening now, where there's these large mass recruitments, 10,000 people a year for 3 years. When the systems actually can really only handle around half that. And when you recruit large numbers, and you're really going to have a problem, first of all, making sure that you do a proper selection, vetting. They have decentralized the system, so you get the situation with corruption happening. If that's in the first batch, there were about 300 recruits who made it into the police academy that hadn't even applied. In other words, that sort of bought their way in. So that just shows that you've got a serious problem there. Also, rather than just recruiting large numbers of people and hoping that they want to become police officials because they really use kind of a minimal set of standards. There's a number of criteria, about 18 criteria to become a constable. Most of it's physical characteristics. And then, of course, you must have a matric certificate and a driver's license. But what you really need to be testing for is the person's ethos. Why do they want to become a police official? What is it about this job that they really want to do? And then, are they able to solve problems with other people? Can they speak to multiple audiences? Are they trained in, or are they good communicators? Can they work in teams? How do they handle difficult situations? So there's a lot of things I don't think we're testing adequately enough for. And then again, if you're looking at your sort of changing crime landscape, you want to start recruiting for specific skills. You want to make sure that you've got people who are really good with technology, and can write clearly and are able to speak clearly and all that kind of thing. So I think the mass recruitment hasn't served us well. We saw it happening between 2002 and 2012. They recruited 7,000 to 10,000 people a year, increased the size of the organization by roughly 70,000 posts. And we have a lot of problems because of that. I mean, even the current minister, when he was the former national commissioner, said we were recruiting for quantity and not quality. And you can't really get quality when you just have these sort of sudden bursts of mass recruitment. You've got to have a plan so that you can recruit deliberately over time the skills you need, and that you're constantly assessing, are we getting the right people? How do they behave and perform as police officials? And then, of course, you need to orientate your training around that. And so it's not about rote learning and knowing how to make an arrest because you read the law. It's really about the practice of policing in the streets with communities. And some of the most modern training methods are modular in the sense that you don't get a pass mark. You assume to know everything, and then you go out and they watch how you actually do it. And there's no kind of, if you can do it 50% well enough, you can become a police official. Either you can do it to the standards or you can't. And I think that's where we can see some positive change that would really strengthen our the people that we get into the organization, how they're able to handle the job, and then make sure that they get the right kind of training so they can do the job as well as they can.
When I listened to Gareth, even our party had posters in the past before to say put an extra 100,000 police on the street if you elect us into government. And it sounds like the quantity is not just going to solve it. A recent example is our crime wardens in Gauteng. It sounds like we're throwing quantity at the problem instead of quality.
Yeah, but this is why I initially spoke about identifying the problem. I talked about then recruiting, training, deploying, because then you recruit, train adequately, and you deploy people according to where you need, a particular, skill or job done. And I think one of the things that is critically very clear is that you don't have visible policing in South Africa anymore. That's one of the greatest problems. You don't have visible policing. Criminals are now running amok in certain areas where, I was in one community where they're telling us that there is now almost an enforced curfew, because after a certain time, it's shooting left, right, and center because, the police are not going there. I can tell you now, you go to a place like Jukley, the police after 6 o'clock, they're not anywhere. Certain police stations at 6 o'clock closes down, so you don't have visible policing. Then you have high, crimes that are taking place there. Your greatest number of vehicles hijacked or stolen in Pretoria will end up either that particular area there, because they know after a certain period of time, the chances of you being intercepted and stopped are very minimal in the area, and then therefore this is the kind of things that will do happen. So I think you need to have constant recruitment and training depending to where you need and the skill that you need. And I think we were right to then say we need these kind of police people that, the number that you need, because according to Interpol studies, I think what is the ratio, 120, 150 to 1 or something like that.
Yeah, there's a range of ratios. It becomes very difficult because different countries have different crime levels and different kinds of policing. So there isn't actually an official ratio. Although we've bandied around because we found, South Africans have found figures that show that we have fewer police than we need. So it's given us the argument that we should have more police. But again, it's you're never going to have enough police officers. If you're thinking about a country of 62 million people, 180,000, 190,000, if they were properly trained and deployed effectively, and you really had good intelligence, and you really looked after your men and women in blue in such a way that they could do the job, they wanted to do the job, they were praised, they were trusted, they were seen to be professionals, you could have really good effect. It's not that we necessarily need to have large numbers of people who are not properly managed, not properly trained. It's probably better to have a smaller, more nimble, agile, more reflective and innovative organization, because you're not trying to police all 62 million people. As you're pointing out, there are very particular areas where crime happens. There are very particular networks that are involved in certain kinds of crimes. So the police's job is to be able to identify, map that out, and then take the fight to those people, dismantle those networks, make sure they arrest people, have evidence to bring them to court, so that the certainty of being held accountable for being involved in crime increases. That's the only way police organizations can effectively reduce crime. And if you're not doing that, if you're just driving around random patrols, even if you have your blue lights everywhere, people will figure it out that if you're just driving around with your blue lights on, but you're not getting out the vehicle and speaking to people or doing anything, then seeing blue lights is not going to necessarily stop criminals from just waiting for you to pass by. So it's also about the way we police, the doctrines we use, and then just pure numbers and how many we have.
But yeah, you see, the point that I was driving to is that visible policing plus the right kind of training that you're able to then identify the problems in particular areas, the telltale signs, that this is what is happening and this is where it's most likely to happen. You're most likely to then drive criminals out of a particular area, and you're able to then start getting crime in control. And you asked towards the end of your question, you ask about the mapanyas or the wardens, which for me is a big worry that you've taken people, you've put in a province that has the highest number of guns, illegal guns, from the stats that we have received, illegal guns that are out there, shooting murders that are taking place, and you are now putting people who are not even trained to then deal with the kind of situations, who themselves are not even equipped to then deal with a confrontation should it escalate to that levels of crime. They are not even authorized to do anything themselves in terms of these kind of things happening. They are not able to then deal with it. So I think we've gone about it the wrong way as things have happened, but there is a need to then reverse this and then say, what is it that we now need to then do? What is at our disposal? And what others are available for us to partner with. I mean, we've been engaging with the private sector, people who are in the private sector who are saying we are doing this, we're doing it successfully for private clients, but we understand that we cannot only worry and concentrate about our clients and their homes and their estates and all of that, because once they step out, they become victims somewhere else. So we now need to work with the whole of society. We need to work with everybody to be able to then ensure that their safety is actually then flawless, irrespective of whether they're home where we have the mandate or they're paying us, or even out there. We want to partner, and that's what we want to then do. And I think if we're able to then do that, it will do quite a lot to then bring the scourge that we're seeing under control.
Yeah, I think the problem is very clear. Gareth, where do we start? I mean, it seems like it's a mountain to climb if we were to take over government and to try and turn it around. But what would your advice be to any government? How do you start? What's your starting point to turn the tide against crime?
Well, look, in ways of looking at it this way, the police are the first responders. You have to get your policing right as quickly as possible. It won't necessarily solve all the factors that contribute to crime, but it will have a dampening effect. And we have seen policing being put to good use in South Africa and in other countries. So you need to really start a program of really professionalizing that organization. It's not just an employment agency. It's a calling, and you need, as I mentioned earlier, to have people that are proud of being police officials, and they feel proud because they know they're trained professionals, and then they're received and seen as trained professionals. And it's a very simple standard. It's like every engagement you as a police official have with the member of the public, whether they are a victim, just asking for directions, or they actually are a suspect. If you uphold their rights and they leave that engagement feeling better about you as a police officer, then you're doing it right. You're doing a good job. Because it's an absolute critical, necessary factor for successful policing is community trust. You've got to have high levels of trust in the police. And I think that's one area we've seen hugely problematic. I think about 3/4, 75% or so say they have very little trust in the police. So that's something you have to start with. Then we need to really start looking at the prevention stuff. You mentioned it in the very beginning. There's social factors that do play a role. And there's many incredibly what we call evidence-based violence prevention interventions that have been proven to work in different contexts. So if you really want to change gender-based violence, you really have to change the attitudes of young men. And you can do this through programs starting at primary school, in high school. And they've tested these programs. They run for about 6 weeks, some of them, and they then track those young men and women over a period of time until they finish school and into adulthood, and find very big reductions in levels of violence by men against women, and women less likely to accept violence from men. So when the crime statistics get released, it's always the police handing out the crime statistics. Actually, it should be the entire cabinet sitting there. And after they've given the crime statistics, every portfolio should say, well, this is what we're doing to make this country safer. How are we improving unemployment, or improving employment rates? How are we making our roads and parks safer? Making sure there's street lights, because it's not, you can't really have a whole range of factors that contribute to serious crime situation, and then you expect the police, who can only really react. It's not proactive work they can do. They can do a lot, and they can do a lot better than they are doing now, but it's not going to be sufficient. You're going to have to start looking at virtually every aspect of government, thinking more about how do we play a role, and then really intervening in not changing what they're doing, but understanding how they do it with criminal justice system is likely to make a big impact.
It sounds like you're talking about a integrated or a whole of society kind of approach. And Solly was a bit critical about strategy at the beginning when he spoke. When we start at the strategy and the policy in government, do you think that we're on the right path there? Are there changes that we do need to implement?
Well, look, we have strategies, but I think the problem we've found is that they are, so we've got an integrated crime and violence prevention strategy. It was developed quite a few years ago now by Social Development Department. It's about the implementation. These strategies are often developed by consultants. They do really good desktop research. They get the international best practices, and they all put those into these documents. And then we realize we don't actually have the capabilities. We don't have the resources. We don't have the people who know how to do this kind of thing. It might be simple project planning skills that you actually need to have. The way the government's set up is everybody's in their own departments. Even the criminal justice system, it's called a system, but the police and the NPA and the correctional services don't plan together. There's no kind of clear understanding of we're all sharing the same priorities, and how do we work together and make sure that we get cases through. And if people are released from prison, that we notify the police to know that this person's on parole, that kind of thing. So it's I think the way we do strategy needs to change. We really need to start with, well, where are we? And then what are we likely to see different if we change small interventions, but we can measure those things in 2 to 3 years, rather than these very big grand strategies that really just stay mostly on paper for years. And then what happens is the police get, they kind of just say, well, look, we've got to be doing something. So then we do these big high visibility operations like Operation Chanele, which generates lots of statistics. High density policing operations are favored globally by politicians usually, and police commanders, because it shows the public that you're doing something. Problem, however, is it's often not very targeted, quite blunt tools, just random roadblocks, lots of people driving around and trying to arrest people. And then you can say, look, we've made 200,000 arrests, but no one's asking the question, well, what happens to those people? Where do those cases go, and what are the arrests for? If we were to be, Operation Chanele is based on Operation Okaimola, which was started in 2019. Since 2019, the murder rate in Gauteng has gone up by almost 40%. So clearly that is not working, but we've been doing it for 5 years. So it's also being able to, when you implement a strategy, if it's not working, being able to have the systems in place to reflect and say, wait, we need to change something here. And then keep trying new things. So have your pilots, do different things in different places. Work with universities and think tanks and researchers to try and assess what's going on. So you've got a constant feedback loop of information. We're doing this. We brought in external people just to assess its effectiveness. They're giving us a starter. How do we use it to better recruit, better train, better deploy and manage our people? And I think that's what we're not doing. So the police kind of see like crime is our job and everybody else must just get out of the way. But they need to be working in much better partnerships with the kind of range of resources that we have available in South Africa if we're really going to see changes.
Right, remember to post your questions on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Sully, we see silos in government every day. I mean, we work with that quite often. Now you become the premier. Now you must break down those silos in order to bring a safer society about. How do you do it?
Well, I've spoken this, and you would know, Fred. I've spoken this even when we were talking about infrastructure. Previously, I've said that government cannot operate in silos, internally and externally. We cannot operate in silos. But let's start internally first. Internally, there's always an issue about how you settle people. What other amenities are you building around where people are settled? I've spoken about the issues of road infrastructure as an example. In an informal settlement where you cannot even get police in and out, themselves, or you cannot even get an ambulance in and out, or a fire truck in and out, you're always going to have, challenges. And we see that where, murders in certain areas, somebody will be murdered, and then you'll be told by the community, no, the police only arrived the next day, to a murder scene of somebody who was murdered, at night. So these are some of the things that, you have to then say, as government, as we plan, what is it that we're going to need to do from an infrastructure perspective, from a social development perspective, and also from a law perspective? How do we work together? But also, I think it is important to understand that, from a provincial perspective, we can do so much. There's also something that is happening from a national perspective that also now needs to be addressed, and that is the rate of prosecution that is taking place, because it's not sitting, with you and me here. Somebody from a justice department is making the decisions, and that is something that also now needs to be looked at. And this is something that when we talk to the police, they say, well, look, we do what we can. These things get to court, but again, prosecution is something that sometimes, if it's something that takes forever and ever in a day, to be able to then get through, and that is something that also now needs to be looked at. So I think there is a need to then make sure that you bring the whole of society in. That I was talking now from an internal perspective. From an external perspective, there is a need to then ensure that you're able to then have all the players coming into play here. I mean, we're talking about the whole of society. What is the NGOs in our spaces, contributing towards the prevention, teaching people, about how, to treat each other and to treat themselves in situations. We're talking about how you then deal with the private, entities in terms of ensuring that private entities, now I'm talking about security companies, how do we then come and play together? Because you need multipliers out there to be able to then fight crime as it may. But there's also another element that I want to then bring in here, and that is, how do we then bring in business to make sure that we are able to then push some of the factors down? The fact that you would have people who are saying, I am going to do shoplifting because I need my children to eat. And I'm not excusing crime and criminals here, but a hungry mouth, will somehow, resort to to elements of crime. And therefore, how do we then get more people into jobs so that we have less people inclined to go into criminal activities? I think these are some of the things that we now need to then say as a whole of society. If we want to live in a peaceful nation, if we want to live in a nation that you're not going to be attacked and robbed of your belongings as you walk down the street of Johannesburg, what are those things that we now need to do as a government internally? Analyze where the problems are, be able to then put people and resources towards those, but also be able to then partner with the society in general to then say, if we are able to do this together, we might be able to then fight this fight in a good way.
Gareth, Solly speaks about partnerships with NGOs and so on, civil society. You've spoken about the integration in government, not working in silos. What about partnerships with the private sector? I mean, it's well documented that the private security industry has huge firepower and human resources, if I can put it that way. Is it something that we should be looking towards in terms of partnerships between government and other role players out there?
Yeah, look, I think given the size and the scale of our crime problem, we really want to have everybody on the same page. And I think in many ways, as I just ended off earlier, the police need to see themselves as maybe project managers and coordinators, not just the only organization that deals with crime. And then, and I think there has been good initiatives with private security companies and the police in some sectors. And it's mostly, as you say, it's about communicating, making sure that if the police are looking for a certain vehicle, there's a platform for all the private security companies in a particular area to also look out for it and then communicate back if they see it. If they often attend a crime scene first, to make sure that they also don't interfere with the evidence and look after the crime scene until the police can arrive, that kind of thing. Then you've also just got these, the big sectors, your mining sector, construction, transport, energy, that have huge amounts of information because they've literally had to set up their own intelligence capabilities, and then their own security companies in order to really protect themselves. And they've got really a lot of very important information. And we've seen this working well with, say, the South African Banking Risk Information Center. SABRIC was set up by the banks. They've had some good successes over the years because of that kind of partnership. And we're starting to see those sector kind of task teams and groups starting to operate now. So it's a good sign. But again, if you don't have the right people who are able to, run a partnership, who really instill trust, and I think it goes back to the kind of challenges of command and control, because it's such a large organization. So if you're sitting there and you can't, as a police commander in one of these sectors, make sure that somebody responds if it's needed there's response needed, then that undermines the sort of trusted relationship. So as I was speaking to in the beginning, there are those kinds of factors. How do the police understand their role? It's not just going out and making arrests. They actually need to kind of be driving a common understanding, making sure they're networking with people, bringing up these partnerships, sharing information, receiving information, and being able to really show that they are willing and able to work with as many sectors as possible, because they're not going to get out of this on their own. And then, of course, where we see prevention, intervention, sometimes you do need the police to go in there just to make sure the place is safe. So if you have social workers going in to a certain area that has got high crimes, or if it's just to fix, infrastructure, fill out potholes or deal with illegal connections, some of that stuff will also be crime prevention, but you need the police to come on board for that.
Yeah, that speaks a lot to environmental design, doesn't it? Solly, in terms of government to government cooperation, we see there's a policy initiative from national government to try and incorporate Metro Police, for instance, into government. And if we know, Metro Police's original role has always been traffic policing, which has always been mainly a municipal function, but also to a degree a provincial function. Do you think that Metro Police should rather be included in the SAPS, or do you think there just needs to be better cooperation between SAPS and the Metro Police?
Well, I think, again, you need to then look at what will give you the best effect and the best bang for your buck. I think Metro Police have the capacity to be multipliers in terms of fighting crime, and not just, doing fundraising and stopping cars in the middle of the road and searching vehicles. There's issues about bylaw enforcement, which I think, for me, is also a contributor towards certain elements of crimes when people are just encroaching, building anyhow, breaking infrastructure, so you do have that as an element that also now needs to be fought at a local level. I think what needs to be done as well is that the coordination needs to be, how do you then make sure, as a province as big as Gauteng with 3 metros that combined will have something like 9 or 10,000 metro police, which can then be also added on to be multipliers. How do you then get that force to be able to then help you to deal what needs to be dealt with? From the Metro Police, I can tell you in Tshwane, you have a drug unit, but it's not used, successfully to then ensure that you also have things like, drug busts that are able to then be taken even up to prosecution. Because what they do is they do the raids, they find suspects, they will find the goods, then they hand over. So how do you then ensure that you're also building the authority that goes all the way, so that you're able to then ensure that you can have much more being done. The same as has come from the private sector as well. Security personnel who are saying, look, we are trained Sometimes I don't know, I cannot verify this, and maybe Gareth might tell us. There are security personnel who are saying we are trained even better than the police, to see these things, to prevent certain things, and to be able to then apprehend, suspects. But then, you arrest the suspect, and the moment you want to then hand over, if you're using your vehicle, so there's a whole lot of technicalities and laws that, prevent, us to do what needs to be done as things stand. I've heard of stories where security apprehended somebody, it was a robbery that was taking place. They were able to foil it. They put somebody in their own vehicle, get them to a police station. By the time they get there, the charges then change against the private security. Now you kidnapped somebody. These are things that, they have to now deal with. So it's an issue of looking at what is the law say? Is the law really hampering, where we are? Are we able to then say, can we change the law? Are we able to then authorize people that can be multipliers to do what needs to be done? Obviously, with and precaution, because you also don't want cowboys now all over, your streets, but also with care, and proper management. You are able to then have not only coordination, but you have people who are then authorized to do things legally, like doing effectively arresting, following up on cases, and making sure that they go through the whole prosecuting system, and getting successful prosecutions, and taking some of the criminals off the streets. I think these are some of the things that if we were to ask me then, what do we do from a national, local, or national, provincial, and local perspective, I would say some of these things are things that we now need to look at. The laws that are there that are hampering, the flawless working together of the different entities, the ensuring that those at a local level are actually then empowered, but also looking at the private sector, we're able to then bring them and give them authority, obviously within care, as I said earlier on, but get them to be multipliers. I'm sure we can look into these things and be able to then roll it out.
Gareth, I want to ask you, I know that we're focusing a lot on the police here, but it is a whole of society. I mean, it starts in the house where you grow up, and then, as you mentioned earlier, school. But just dealing with one more policing question is, how important is technology and information systems in the fight in the fight against crime?
It's very important. As I mentioned earlier, you can't police 62 million people if you don't have a clear understanding of where you want to be, who you're going after, what do the networks look like, and have systems for gathering information, processing that information, and then using it in such a way. So, there's been great strides made in technology related to crime. Some of it's the actual hard crime fighting tools, drones and CCTV and body cameras and all that kind of thing. But as important really is data analysis. It's people really can actually look at what are the various sorts of information. Some of it's going to be statistical, but some of it's going to be qualitative. And you're going to be able to need people who know how to work with this information. And that's usually what's contained in sort of intelligence capabilities in policing. There's the side that does the undercover work and infiltrates and does human intelligence. There's actually quite a large side that looks for using open source social media platforms to see what people are doing and how they do it. If you arrest somebody for a serious crime like a house robbery, and download their phone, you'll find them sharing pictures of all the stuff they've stolen and their illegal firearms with their networks, stuff like that. So being able to do that is very important. And of course, we just are seeing quite a big emergence of cybercrime related, whether it's fraud, hacking, extortion on, it's becoming a huge problem. And so you need police officers to be able to understand that stuff. So technology is a huge issue. And I think there's a lot more we could be doing to really kind of keep on top of that. Because with a police budget of currently over 110 billion rand, I'm not quite sure. I've never seen a policy document that says, how does the South African Police Service decide what technology to purchase, and then how do they make sure that they maintain that and use it effectively, and then assess whether it's working. In some police agencies internationally, they won't just choose one. They'll pilot about 6 or 7 different types of technologies. It might be body worn cameras. They try out all of them, and then see what works best in the field for their officers, so that they know exactly what to train them in, what they can expect before they then get into the big contracts. So there's probably work there to be done as well.
So, do you think we're spending enough money to fight crime, or is it just being ineffectively used?
Well, I think yeah, it's a combination of both. I think we have been focusing on wrong things. We've been focusing on what looks sexy, and that's what I always say government does. Our government is always trying to do what looks sexy, you know, putting 50 high-powered vehicles there, but at the end of the day, what does that translate to? Panyaza was flowing, or they were displaying during the state of the province address, 2 helicopters, and then these vehicles and these high-powered BMWs that are now being crushed left, right, and center. But it doesn't really translate to what Gareth is talking to. Are we really looking at the technology and the effectiveness of the technology being deployed? Are we also having the basics covered? It doesn't help that you have drones, flying all over. When you call 10 111, you can't get an answer. It doesn't help that you're talking about having panic buttons, that when I press that panic button at a police station in Garankuwa, nobody is able to then receive that information to be able to then react. So these are some of the things that we now need to then be talking to then say technology is important, but have we gotten our bases covered? If we are going to press that panic button, do we even have enough vehicles to be able to then respond, to a particular situation? When you pick up the phone and call and say, I'm seeing something happening right in my street right here, is somebody going to be able to then come? First of all, do you even guarantee your residents that somebody is going to pick up the call on the other end? Because we have heard of 10 number not working. We have heard of police stations, of policemen saying, in this area, you're going to need, as a constable or as a sergeant, give out your own personal number because there's no any other number that is working. So I am saying, before you even talk about this high caliber technology that you want to then use, you need to have your basics covered. And technology is supposed to, add on to the base that is there and to enhance, the policing. But at this point in time, even the basics are actually failing. So it talks to us being able to have the right kind of trained people. The second thing is them being resourced to do what needs to be done at a basic level. And then you can then talk about how do you then bring all these things. And the private sector has already said, we will even make some of our infrastructure available. They will make some of their CCTV cameras. Vuma has been an example of that they've been doing it even before Panyaza made that announcement of the so-called partnership. They've been doing it. You go to Midvaal, they've been doing it. They've been doing it in certain suburbs in Johannesburg. Pretoria has had those cameras, operating. So you now need to then say, how do you then roll it out? But what is happening in the back room? So is you having all this technology going to feed into the police who are able to then do something on the ground quick enough? You're talking about issues like farm murders and farm robbery or farm house robberies and all of that. Fact of the matter is, right now you don't even have police that are able to have the kind of vehicles that can move them quick enough in certain terrains. As an example, I was in a certain part of where the only vehicles that the police station have to go into these farm areas is 2 motorbikes. Now, motorbike in the middle of the night, somebody sits there in the dark and waits for you, and then you're out. So these are some of the things that we are saying before you even talk, and we should be talking technology, but we need to make sure that we have the basics that should be covered. Police that are trained properly, police that have the right kind and the right amount of vehicles to do what needs to be done. The private sector that can work with the police, to tap into each other's networks and to be able to also communicate with each other. Certain areas you don't even have police that have two-way radios. If you're in the car, if you're not using your cell phone, you're not able to then communicate with another car that is in, or they should be in the same area. So that is some of the challenge that we need to be talking to then say, are those basics covered? Once those basics are covered, then you can talk about bringing in choppers. You can talk about bringing in drones. You can talk about bringing in, body cameras and things like that. And you know that you have then a force that is able to then respond accordingly.
So, Gareth, if we move beyond the police a little bit, you spoke about it earlier, about, the police catches somebody and all these arrests happen, and then what? Is the NPA a bottleneck in dealing with crime?
I don't think so. I mean, the NPA handles or processes around over 900,000 cases a year. I think it certainly could be a better resource. We could have a lot more prosecutors. I think there's various kinds of challenges about how we use this criminal justice system. That there could be quite big efficiencies. I mean, if you think about, say, road accident fund matters, how many of those end up in the courts, clogging up the courts? That's actually could be a tribunal or more of an administrative function. So are we using our courts effectively? So that we get judges and magistrates dealing with stuff that really makes a difference in terms of making us safer. But I think there is a role to, as I mentioned earlier, the system does need to work a bit more fluid. And this is something that came up as far back as 2008. There was a presidential assessment of the criminal justice system, and they said they're working in silos, but they're all part of the same system. We need to have very clear priorities, so that your prosecutors and your police can also work quite closely to each other. And that's very important for organized crime, corruption, quite complex cases. What we seem to have is the sort of police go out and do the investigations, however long it takes. And if it's a complex corruption or fraud case, they'll then arrive at a prosecutor's office with boxes full of evidence. Might be 300, 400 charges there. This prosecutor's now going to spend another 6 months before we can get all through that, and formulate the charges. Whereas if the prosecutor and the detectives on some of these serious priority cases were working more closely together, then the issue is not to investigate everything. It's like, if we can get this guy on 2 charges and that's going to lead to a 20-year sentence, let's forget the other 20 or 200 charges, because we have so many other cases. So it's that kind of partnership that we know they are starting to look at that, but that's something that could make a big difference.
Sorry, do you think having a closer relationship between the police and the prosecuting authority would help the police also to be more efficient in investigating their cases and putting something on the table?
Well, I think so. I think first of all, you need to have the kind of training at a lower level, and I'm talking about at a constable level, the person that is interfacing with there is what do you call it, the victim, if you like. First of all, if I walk into a police station, that person that I'm talking to and saying this is just what happened, the person who's taking that statement, how I'm treated, how this thing is handled, will have an impact of the outcome at the end of the day. So how the prosecuting authority relates to what is prosecutable, or what is the procedure for us to be able to then prosecute successfully, there needs to be that close link and relationship, and in terms of training. But I think there's also going to be a need for us to talk about how do you then ensure that you don't have very big gaps between the criminal system and the justice system. In between, you end up having situations where dockets go missing, as an example. What happens? What is happening with that? Somebody, and I've seen this. You appear today in a magistrate court, the docket is there. The very next day, the prosecutor can't find the document anywhere, can't find the docket anywhere. So what would be happening, or what would have happened in that? So we need to close that gap and make sure that between the investigating system that is taking place, the prosecuting system that is taking place, there is, it's flawless. I think that's where also technology now needs to also then come into play, that you are not able to then lose any kind of dockets. We have seen where criminals and high caliber or high resourced drug lords and criminal elements would walk in there, and cocky as they are, 2 minutes later they walk out, because the system somehow seems to be broken. So how you build it and how you build the relationships is going to be very much important. And also, how do you bring technology in that in that stream to make sure that you then are not going to run the issue of the human changing of files and all of that, which then also becomes a big problem in South Africa.
Now, Solly, when you look at this whole chain, a whole society approach, I mean, you've got social development, you've got the household, you've got education, you've got the police, then you have metro police, you have traffic police, you have the NPA, all these playing a role in helping you to bring down crime. But as a provincial government, you have limited powers. So you don't have powers over the prosecuting agency, but you have some influence over the police, and you have some relationships with municipalities, and you've got control over social development. How do you bring all these things together so that everybody works together to make Gauteng safe?
Yeah, and this is why, you know, you will find that what we're proposing is that there be a task team that is developed to look at all these elements that you know, will make South African residents feel safer, feel better served, whether it's through safety, security, whether it's through health, whether it's through education. All of these things needs to talk to one another. There's no way that you can then say, I'm going to develop a township if I'm not going to have a police station in it, or at least a satellite police station in it. There's no way I'm going to develop a settlement if I'm not going to have roads that are going in there, clinic that is close by, and schools and all of these amenities that are in there. So that is taking care of how do you plan on developing going forward. But there's also an element of then saying, I have the provincial the provincial traffic officers, which if we then expand the power, can then also then look into certain issues outside of just you know, control of traffic. And yes, if we have to then also petition the national government to allow us to then, you know, as I said earlier on, to have power to be able to then do these other things, and also to look at some of the hindering laws that are there, to then also be able to then bring in the private sector to then say we can hold hands and then be able to then do these things, you know, going forward. But I think there's also an element in terms of what we are doing with the education system, Fred. When we were growing up, there was, and this is part of what now it's called life orientation, where we were taught about being a responsible citizen, which in my mind seems to have somehow, left the room. That, you know, you don't have that anymore as something that is instilled, taught, you know, into the society, and you know, people are somehow just expected to do, to do good. But this is something that we, as a society that is now battling with these things, I think we can then reintroduce this into the education system as well. I'm not talking about indoctrinating, you know, people to behave like stooges or anyhow, but I'm talking about bringing social education and responsible citizenry that we can then introduce at a school level, that kids grow up understanding, knowing these things, that, you know, this is wrong, that is right, and how do we then deal with it.
Now that sounds like a good initiative on the preventative side. So, but now we've arrested a criminal, they've been prosecuted, they've been sent to jail or correctional services or a correctional facility. Somebody once described them to me as universities of crime. Does our correctional service system work? Do we rehabilitate criminals, or are we just sending them out there as more skilled criminals?
Yeah, I think we could do a lot more with rehabilitation. I think most of the budget of the Department of Correctional Services is actually on security, and a very small proportion is actually on rehabilitation. It's one of the kind of big questions that has had criminologists scratching their heads for years and trying to do research. What is it that helps people rehabilitate? And I think it is the conditions of the prison. If the prisons are overcrowded, if people are locked up for long periods of the day, if they're not actually given programs that can really help them develop skills and get jobs when they come out and actually play a productive role. And there's support systems outside of the prisons, because what we usually do is we just release them. You know, they've got a house or residential address, they must report to a police station until their custodial sentence is over. But that's not helping rehabilitation. So I think, and we do know we have a big problem with gangsters, and gangs do run parts of the prison. So it's something that you'd also need to do a lot of work on. And I think it's one of those areas that hasn't really made it into many of the manifestos yet, because we kind of don't think about the correctional services. But most of those people are going to come out, and we'd rather them come out wanting to be part of the solution of South Africa and not just feeling that they're still part of the problem.
So you want to get to a situation where you don't need to build more jails, but that you actually turn people out that can reintegrate into society. Absolutely. So I think we're about to wrap up, but Solly, where do we start? You first day in the office. You're not just you're faced with a bunch of
Yeah.
stuff. It's budgets, it's social development, it's education, it's all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to fighting crime, what's your very first thing that you're going to do?
Fred, I am determined to ensure that within the first 100 days, we try and get more power released from a national minister. And I've said this, you can't fight crime the same way as you'd fight crime in the Eastern Cape, as you'd fight crime in Gauteng, as you'd fight crime in Mpumalanga. You need to have localized and provincialized plans and also the authority to be able to then do it. So I am determined to say within the first 100 days, we will petition the national minister to then say, are we able to start talking and ensuring that we act on devolving power to a provincial level? That at a provincial level, we can then say, what can we do in terms of identifying the issue, the kind of trends and crimes that we need to deal with, ensuring that we're able to recruit the kind of people that we need to recruit, ensuring that we're able to then deploy the police where we need to then deploy them, and looking at also the resources that are needed for our police at a provincial level to be able to then do that and to work with the private sector and also the general public in ensuring that we have quality policemen on the ground, skilled police people that are able to then do what needs to be done, obviously bringing in the private sector into that as well. But more importantly, how do we then get back the basics right? So one of the things that I want to do is to make sure that we're able to then look at the conditions of the police stations, each and every police station in Gauteng. Even those that have been closed, why have they been closed? There used to be a second police station in Atteridgeville called Vembe. It was demolished, but nothing was ever done to replace that. And then you still wonder why there's high, levels of crimes in Atteridgeville. Mamelodi is in need of another police station, as an example. You go into areas like Mohlakeng, there's a need for a police station in there. You go to Angelo, which have to rely on then the Germiston police station. So you look at what is available in terms of your infrastructure and your resources, and then say, is this then enough to then get this man, doing what needs to be done? I'm committed to then saying we're going to then start looking into that. I'm not naive to the fact that it's going to be a long-term, fight that we have to then take. But I think there are men and women in the uniform who are wanting to do more, who want motivation to then say, if this government really does invest, if this government really does what needs to be done, we will do what we now need to then do. But at this point in time, they are not resourced. They are not resourced. They're not supported. In fact, some of them are saying we live in the force because we're feeling that there's more politicking in the force than there is actual policing that needs to happen. We now need to then change that, and if we can change that, we will be on our way to then dealing with some of the things that had been raised and what we want to then do going forward.
Gareth, you're not a politician, but you're a scholar. So if you became the chief advisor to the provincial police commissioner, what would your advice to him be to turn the tide against crime in the province?
I'd say you look at the problem as a 5-year problem that you want to solve over 5 years. Don't get sidetracked by all the things that look good but don't have impact. Use all the resources, and I think Solly has been alluding to that. See who's got what resources, bring everybody on board, and then have a clear strategy. Map out where the crime's taking place, get information about who's involved, and then develop very local specific strategies. Some of it's going to be policing orientated, but some of it, as I mentioned in the beginning, interpersonal violence, alcohol and drug abuse, those things you can't easily police, but you can have huge impact on through peer counseling, through mentorship, through sports programs. There's just a whole range of interventions. So see it as a big picture thing, where criminal justice is a key component of it. But over time, if you start making life safer for children between the ages of 0 and 10 now, you're going to see you'll see big improvements in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think we tend to focus too much on the policing. It is important, it's absolutely critical, but we've really got to start in our schools, using our social workers better, and create the safest possible environment for the children. Children will become likely to use aggression and violence if they experience it themselves, if they see it in the communities, in their homes. And I think we're not doing enough to really make sure that our children grow up not wanting to be violent. They think violence is a necessary thing. It's a tool that you, if you're a young man, that's how you navigate the streets. And you want to get hold of a weapon because you want to protect yourself. So we've got to try and change that mindset. And that's, so you'd have to bring in your anthropologists and other people to really kind of give you a holistic plan. So I'd say that.
Well, there you have it. The solution to crime is definitely a whole of society approach that requires partnerships between government departments, governments, the private sector, civil society, everybody to bring their expertise to the table and really work towards a plan and a goal. So thank you very much, Gareth Newham from the Institute of Security Studies, for joining us tonight. Solly Msimanga, thank you. Next week, we're talking jobs, and thank you everybody for sending us your questions as well. But next Monday, we're talking jobs in our virtual town hall, and we'll see you here, same place, same time. Cheers, everybody. Thank you very much.